How many knots do you really need to know? You ready to run guns? Time for blast off. Let's go. Hey guys, Todd here with you. Welcome back to Bassin 101 Trick Talk Bupkis Wisdom. How many knots do you really need to learn? Personally, I say 3. I think 3 will do it. Now, supposedly the 3 knots I'm getting ready to talk about are not suggested to be used for fluorocarbon. Fluorocarbon does not tie knots very well, so you have to be very careful about the type of knot you tie. And before we even start, I'm not a fan of fluorocarbon, so you guys can thumb me down or whatever now, because this is basically monofilament, but you can use it for braid. But this is basically monofilament. I've actually tied these knots with braid, never had an issue. But the first one is the improved clinch knot. Maybe some of you guys refer to it as the trilene knot. You know, you go twice through, come up about 4 or 5 turns max, and come back through the bottom of the loop, tighten it up. The other is a Palomar knot. And the third is a loop knot. Now I did a video, I think, a couple of years ago, where I showed these knots using like a paracord, so you can actually see the knot as I'm tying it. And those 3 knots were in that video with a couple of others, including the Gerald Swindle behind the barn shindu knot. But there's a reason I use these 3 knots. The main reason is it doesn't use a lot of line. Now, how many of you guys have used elaborate knots and you're constantly tying, retying on the water and everything, and within, let's say you go fishing for about a month and you start realizing that the line level on your bait catcher is getting kind of low? It's because you're using a lot of line tying knots. Or if you put a leader on braid, that leader doesn't last long because you're always retying. Then you gotta put the leader back on again. Normally, when I use I use mono on braid, but when I do a leader, it's about a 15-foot leader, 15 to 20 foot, because I want to give myself plenty of room for retying things. That's the reason I do it. And I use an FG knot, and that sucker right there is aggravating. It's all good out, but I'm gonna tell you what though, I've never had it fail me on the water. So but yeah, the one that takes up the most amount of line is going to be your Palomar knot. And before I cinch it down, I tend to feed the tag end through and everything, so I've only got like so much of a tag end, so I'm not wasting a lot of line. But that's the reason I use the improved clinch, or double loop clinch as Bill Dance calls it, or a trilene knot, so I think Jimmy Houston calls it. But the Palomar, and then the loop knot. And of course, loop knot is when you want to throw a topwater, but you don't want it use a snap, or you don't want to use a split ring, or wrap a lamina, something like that. Now I know some guys that use these elaborate knots, you know, the Gerald Swindle knot that I showed, and I even mentioned to him, you know, it takes a lot of line to tie that thing. And I even told him, I was like, you know, that wastes a lot of line off your reel, man. You probably had to put line on your reel about every other day, ain't you? And he says, I'm sponsored. Of course, you know, we made a joke about it, but we laughed about it. But you know, he saw the point I was making, and he fessed up to it. He said, hey, it's just a lot of line. But that's the reason I use those 3 knots. It takes up the least amount of line. And Palomar being the most, the one that uses the most line. But like I said, I'll feed my tag in through and kind of work it through, especially if I have time. You know, if I'm at the house pre-tying a bunch of stuff, I will take my time and use the least amount of tag as I can. Now on the water, that's a different story. I mean, if you got time, okay. But if you don't, you're tying a Palomar one or the other with a long tag end. That's just the way it is. But what do you guys use? I mean, or how many knots do y'all know? Or maybe you might know some knots that work great for you that use a less amount of line, and would like to share it with some of us, because I'm always willing to learn. I'm always willing to hear what somebody else has to say about something. So I don't know. What do you guys think? So until next time, remember, new techniques are trendy, but past never change. May the Father bless you and keep in Yeshua's name, and as always, fish on, man.